Welcome back. It's great to have you back and great to be with you. You might have noticed that the title of this podcast is What's the Right Meditation for Me? So a little bit of an explanation. I actually sat down to do this podcast yesterday. My intention was to kind of make it simple so that anyone looking to find the right meditation practice could kind of have some general sense of the terrain and indeed find the best practice for them. What happened was I got into the weeds and I got into the depth of it, partially because I'm preparing to teach a 5-day training in meditation and then begin what will be a year-long course for those wanting to teach and guide others into meditation and prescribe practices. So I'm going to redo it. I'm going to do this one. I'm going to let that one stand on its own and you'll be able to access it. It'll be the very next one. But let's see if we can do this, answer this question of what's the right meditation for me in a kind of much shorter version. Okay, so let's see if I can do this. So let's begin with this idea of, first of all, there are multitudes of meditation practices. There's a singular yogic tantric text that actually describes more than 100 different meditation techniques. And many of these you're familiar with. Meditate on the breath, meditate on chakras, use mantra, mindfulness, Kriya meditation. It goes on and on and on. There's many techniques. So which the right one? On my apps, for example, there's also more than 100 different practices and counting. So how do you find the right one for you? That's the subject of this conversation. So let's see. It really depends. It's classic kind of phraseology around yoga, Ayurveda. What's the right practice for me? It depends. It depends on what you want out of the practice. It depends where you are in your own development with, say, meditation. But let's just try and keep it relatively simple. I mean, rather than speak to techniques, I'll do that in a few moments, but let's just kind of get a sense of the terrain. And these are generalizations. It doesn't apply to everyone, but this is it gives us some guidelines for how to proceed. The first thing we want to do is help our mind get calm. You know, the basis of meditation practice is fundamentally the same, not in all methodologies, but there's a few things that are the same. These are the through lines of meditation practice. Number one is, in general, when our mind wanders, we want to bring our attention back to what we're actually supposed to be doing, whatever that is. If it's concentration on your breath or a mantra, if it's watching and observing yourself thinking, whatever you're effectively doing, you want to be doing it. Your attention should be in the present moment as much as possible, and whenever it wanders, the intention is to bring it back to what you're supposed to be doing, whatever that object is. That's one of the through lines of meditation practice. The other thing is to begin to have this experience where you see you're not exactly your thoughts. You are something more than your thoughts. You're actually that which is observing your mind thinking. And this is how, when your mind has wandered, a part of you goes, oh, wait a minute, I'm supposed to be aware of my breath, so let me bring attention back to it. That's pretty straightforward. So there are two through lines of almost all meditation practices. I feel comfortable in making this general statement. Number one, keep your mind where, ideally, when your mind wanders from what it's supposed to be doing, you bring it back. That's actually called dharana in the yoga tradition. You're concentrating. You're efforting the mind back. And two, you begin to develop a sense of awareness, a deeper sense of perception, so that you're not your mind. Okay, so those are the two through lines of meditation. Almost all meditation practices are going to help you progress along those two lines. That's good news, because number one, it means that you're going to be more attentive. The very process of meditation, even if your mind is wandering, is beneficial because it teaches you to be more attentive, to attend to the present moment more. And when you are observing it wandering, you're not in the present. It's probably either in the past or in the future or distracted by something that's happening in your environment. Typical way that our mind works. But when we're meditating, we become conscious of it. And the second thing is that gradually It may not happen right away, but gradually, this process of attending to our own mind, as well as the object that we are intending to focus on, the effect of that is we begin to discover a quality of awareness that is beyond our intellect, beyond our rational mind. It's not irrational. It's just not confined in the same way to learning, belief, and conditioning, history, etc. Okay. So if I were to prescribe a general first step for most practitioners, it would be to calm your mind. The basis for making the mind more calm can be an array of different techniques. For example, meditation on the breath. And the thing that will benefit us the most, perhaps, is just having the experience that it's possible to shift from a hyper state of alertness, diffusion, distractedness, to a sense of ease. That's a huge and significant step. And so there are many techniques that help us do that. You can, and one of the most effective and universal of all techniques kind of pervades the globe and has been here since time immemorial, which is watching your breath. Why the breath? Well, the breath is constant. So if I use a mantra, for example, or a visualization or an image, I have to create the image and then attend to it. Does that make sense? I have to actually be mindful of, or I have to be intentional to establish the mantra or establish, because the mantra doesn't necessarily exist in my conscious mind, I have to intend it to be present. Same with, say, a meditation on a chakra or an image or many, many things. On the other hand, you do not have to manufacture your breathing. Thankfully, you are breathing. It's a given. Therefore, that's one way that you can actually relax a bit. But here's the other and more impactful element about watching your breath, is the breath informs you about the quality of your attention. How does it do that? That your breath reflects your mind. In other words, when you are calm, your breath will naturally slow down. When you're restless, the breath will reflect that. When you're angry, the breath will reflect that. And what we get to do, this is the advantage that this gives us, is by beginning to recognize the unconscious patterning in the breathing, we actually begin to see the unconscious patterning in our mind. That's a gift. Because most of the time we're just thinking and doing, and we're just experiencing life as it is. And what we lose in the process of living like that, where we're unaware of ourselves, we're just simply reacting to the environment, reacting to our sensory perception, is we realize, or we lose the capacity to choose how we can show up in the best way in any given moment. As you progress in that, and this is why the breath is so powerful, so significant, such a pervasive tool that's used in the meditation world, we begin to get a healthy distance from the reactive mind, and we begin to step into some of the higher capacities or qualities of the mind. I would offer that the second step, so if you've gotten a taste of that, you begin to realize that, hey, meditation might just have something for me. And clearly, admittedly, on the way to experiencing calm, you're going to experience your mind being distracted. That's natural. We all do. We all have experienced it, and we've experienced it time and time again, so you're not alone in that. But once you do that, then I would recommend, and what we make the case for is the next step, general step, is that you begin to coalesce your attention in a sense. You begin to get a glimpse of a sense of inner joy or contentment. Now, that's not exactly the same thing as calm. Calm, I'm making the case, is the absence of turbulence and distraction. When we can bring that when we can bring that sense of ease, but we can bring it to an experience of enduring inner wholeness or contentment. If you are a meditator, you might already have a sense of what I'm leading into. What this is suggesting is that you consider heart-centered practices. Imagine that joy is something that endures in each of us, and that in our moments of relaxing, our moments of feeling loved, and that we have autonomy, and that we are okay, or we've just achieved or managed to bring into our life something that we've wanted for a while, and this joy kind of percolates out of us spontaneously. But it's there all along. And so heart-centered practices are practices that begin to get us, provide to us a consistent experience that we are whole no matter what. The Rod Stryker podcast is in part sponsored by Sanctuary, my meditation, yoga nidra, and deep sleep app. With its easy-to-use interface and hundreds of audio tracks, upon downloading the app and becoming a subscriber, you will, within minutes, be able to find the ideal practice for whatever you need: healing, peace, empowerment, or a spiritual experience. You'll be able to find the right practice for you, no matter your level, and no matter how much time you might have. Also, I'm super pleased to be able to announce that we're now doing what I think is maybe the ultimate BOGO program. When you become a subscriber, you'll be able to give a subscription free to a teenager, a young person who could benefit from these practices. Just think about the difference you could make in a young person's life. We know that these practices do make a difference. My hope is that you will not just practice more, but give the gift of practice to someone you care about. Now, there is some overlap here. Getting the mind calm will also do that to some degree. But we now become more purposeful or intentional and more focused on the heart. And the other option in stage 2 I would offer is these practices that are generally called mindfulness. Now, mindfulness has become the term is almost so overused. It's almost as though anytime you try and get your mind in the present, you're being mindful. That's not exactly what the practice is all about, and this isn't really the opportunity to go into the depth of what that's all about. But in short, what it's suggesting is this concept I already began to offer, which is that you become established, whether you're watching your thoughts or your breath, or whether you're observing sensations in your body. These are all methodologies, or you're listening to sounds in the environment. These are all meditative techniques. And by the way, using things that are outside of your body is called exteroception, and is a beautiful, in fact, for many of us, it'll actually be very helpful to be outside of the body and be more aware. So, and it can actually be a kind of counterpose for the mind, for those of us who are internal. But the point is that whatever we're perceiving, we're consciously establishing ourselves as the observer of our mind experiencing it. So are you experiencing the environment? Are you experiencing your thoughts? Are you experiencing sensations in your body? You remain a non-judgmental, curious observer. It could also be called a compassionate observer, so that no matter what you're perceiving, you remain somewhat disentangled from the movement and the experience, from the movement of the mind, the experience that you're having, and you view it as if you were watching waves roll in, sitting on the shore, observing waves rising and falling in the ocean. Your mind is just waves rising and falling. So I would say in stage 2, after we've established a quietude, a calm, a sense that it is possible to be something other than a thinking animal, constantly spinning out new thoughts, new patterns of mind. Once that happens, I'm either going to pivot, and particularly during emotionally challenging times, it's really profoundly healing and valuable to reorient yourself to the part of you that is inherently content. And some of these ancient traditions create a lot of clarity around what that contentment is. The suggestion is that when your mind becomes quiet enough, when it's centered, say, in the heart, you can experience a contentment that is not conditional, that does not come and go as your circumstances change. So, stage 2, I either go toward the heart center and a sense of building autonomy and coherence, and I coalesce the mind into a sense of wholeness that is there in my heart, establishing a sense of contentment. As I said, this is a beautiful direction to go when we have emotional turmoil in our lives. And I also suggested, though, that perhaps in this stage, gaining some insight, gaining some distance from our mind would be helpful. Some of us always have this feeling of kind of observing our minds being somewhat either spacey or disembodied, for lack of a better word, not fully grounded in ourselves. So sometimes those mindfulness practices may be less than ideal, unless perhaps the orientation is to sensations in your body. I think that makes sense. Then there's a third category, and I'm just going to go through this relatively quickly. Again, there's another podcast for a little more depth about these ideas. The concept is develop power. How do you develop power? It is through bringing attention to different centers in the body, abdominal center, for instance, or heart center or throat center. The basic idea here is that we can begin to focus mind on inner resources, concentrate life force, concentrate the very vital current that sustains your life, that fuels your mind, that makes your heart beat, your kidneys to dilate. And by beginning to bring the mind to bear on an object that itself is vital, the mind then begins to take on those qualities. And that's a whole category of meditation techniques that abound in the practice of Tantra yoga meditations that are indeed fortifying, enlivening. We can see the purpose for that, but in order to make any use of that in a meaningful way, you first have to get calm. Perhaps you first have to coalesce your mind that you are okay no matter what. Trying to coalesce, trying to draw in and connect to power without a sense of wholeness, without a sense of a calm mind, is probably not going to be very productive until those other things are established. So this, again, is a little bit of a general outline of the sequence. The fourth thing is, and the final stage, is more or less to reach the experience of what we'll call non-dual, so that you are one. And that, again, can be done. These last two categories, by the way, mantra really has a place in both of these categories, depending on how you practice mantra. And there is more than one way to practice mantra. There can be mantra that helps get your mind calm, as in TM. The focus in that practice is to get the mind calm, and then you stop doing the mantra. But in other practices, that's not the case. Again, explain more fully in the next pod. In this instance, this final stage of meditation, this is where devotion and love and sense of a higher power and communing with something that is not limited, as most of us, as all of us are, and most of us are constantly identified. So this is where a sense of enduring oneness, where you, the meditator, become absorbed in source, where you and the source become one thing. So I've divided this idea. I've tried to lay out the territory of what's the right meditation for me, based on the idea that, listen, there are many destinations of meditation. We don't hold to the idea that in many paths, one destination. It's true that there is one destination ultimately in life, source, reality, higher reality, the absolute. But what it suggests is that different practices provide different outcomes. If you only have access to one technique, it's that whole hammer and nail story. You know that one, right? If your only tool is a hammer, every problem looks like a nail. So there is not one meditation that's ideal for everybody at every stage of their life. Okay. It's why I've divided those 100+ practices on my app Sanctuary and my Union platform and into 4 fundamental categories. They more or less follow these lines, these categorizations I've described already. The last thing I'll just say is that finally there are 3 places where most meditation techniques are centered. Third eye, brain center, which is essentially fulfilling of the calming scenario. The heart center, which I've already described as being the place we go for this most coalesced version of ourselves, that we need nothing and no one to feel complete. And the abdominal center, or the spine itself, to access a greater sense of power. And finally, when we reach that last stage of oneness with Source, the practice ultimately is non-local. We can go through any one of those portals, third eye, heart, or navel, or spine, but in the end, we abandon the location and completely let go. Okay, I hope that's helpful. Again, if you want some more detail, please listen to the next pod. I look forward to seeing you, and we'll see you next time. Thank you.